The rain drummed against the cracked windows of the law office like impatient fingers, each drop a reminder that time waits for no one, especially not for those who can barely afford to wait at all. Maria Elena Vasquez sat in the stiff leather chair, her calloused hands folded in her lap, trying not to think about the $43 left in her checking account, where the eviction notice crumpled in her purse like a dying flower. She had worn her best dress, the navy blue one with the small tear near the hem that she'd mended 3 times, because her mother had always said that dignity was the one thing poverty couldn't steal from you. But sitting here now, surrounded by mahogany and marble, by men in suits that cost more than she made in 6 months, Maria wondered if her mother had been wrong about that, too. "Mrs. Vasquez," said Attorney Jonathan Blackwell, his voice carrying the smooth authority of someone who had never wondered where his next meal would come from. He was younger than she had expected, maybe 45, with silver threading through his dark hair like expensive wire. His hands were soft, unmarked by labor, and they moved with the practiced precision of someone accustomed to handling other people's futures. "I'm sorry for your loss. Your father was a complicated man." Maria's throat tightened. She hadn't seen her father in 27 years, not since that terrible night when he'd chosen his obsession over his family, when he loaded his pickup truck with mining equipment and disappeared into the Colorado mountains like a ghost chasing fool's gold. She was 8 years old, watching her mother cry, understanding that he had chosen his dreams over his family. "I don't understand why I'm here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt foreign in this pristine office, among these people who spoke in legal terminology and measured grief in billable hours. We weren't close. Blackwell's expression softened, but there was something else there too, something that looked almost like anticipation. "Your father never stopped thinking about you, Mrs. Vasquez. In fact, you're the sole beneficiary of his estate." The word estate hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigar. Maria almost laughed, would have if the situation weren't so painfully absurd. Her father, Eduardo Vasquez, had been a dreamer who died alone in a trailer at the foot of some god-forsaken mountain, chasing a fantasy that had cost him everything that mattered. What kind of estate could a man like that leave behind? "There isn't much," Blackwell continued, shuffling through papers that whispered secrets she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. "A small trailer, some personal belongings, and the mine claim." "The mine?" Maria's voice cracked like dry earth. She remembered her father's stories, the way his eyes would light up when he talked about the fortune waiting in the ground, about emeralds the size of chicken eggs, and veins of precious stone that would make them all rich beyond imagination. Her mother used to call them fairy tales, designed to justify abandonment. "I thought it was worthless. I thought that's why he died broke," he finished, gently. "He did. The claim has been considered played out for decades. Several companies have tested it over the years. All came up empty. Your father spent his life savings, and then some, trying to prove them wrong." Across from Maria, 2 other men shifted in their seats like predators scenting weakness. She had been introduced to them when she had first arrived, but their names had meant nothing to her then. Now, watching the way they looked at her, she began to understand that names could carry weight she hadn't anticipated. "Which is why," said Stonefield, leaning forward with the kind of smile that never reached the eyes, "we'd like to make you an offer." "An offer?" Maria repeated. "The land your father claimed sits in an area we're interested in developing. Mining operations, yes, but also potentially tourism. Maybe even residential development down the line. The location has possibilities." The way he said possibilities made something cold settle in Maria's chest. These weren't the first wealthy men who had looked at her like she was something to be managed, something inconvenient that could be solved with the right amount of money. She thought of her ex-husband, of the way he'd promised her security and then left her with nothing but debt and a 10-year-old daughter who still asked why Daddy didn't love them enough to stay. "We're prepared to offer you $50,000, said Stonefield, producing a check from his jacket pocket like a magician pulling out a rabbit. The paper looked crisp and clean and impossibly official. $50,000. The number echoed in Maria's head like a prayer she'd been afraid to whisper. $50,000 could mean a new apartment, could mean her daughter Isabella wouldn't have to change schools again, could mean grocery shopping without calculating every penny, could mean breathing room for the first time since her husband had walked out 3 years ago. But there was something in Stonefield's eyes that reminded her of the way certain men looked at women they thought were desperate enough to accept whatever scraps they were offered. Something that made her mother's voice echo in her memory. "Mija, when someone offers you something that seems too good to be true, especially when they're in a hurry, you ask yourself what they know that you don't." "That's very generous," she said carefully, "but I'd like some time to think about it." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Stonefield's smile became a fraction tighter, and Webb's fingers drummed against his knee in a rhythm that suggested impatience poorly disguised as consideration. "Of course," Stonefield said, his voice still smooth but carrying an edge now, like silk wrapped around a blade. "But I should mention that mining claims can be complicated to maintain. There are fees, regulations, environmental assessments. For someone without experience in the industry, it can become quite overwhelming, expensive." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Maria felt her spine straighten despite herself, felt something her grandmother used to call the Vasquez steel flow through her veins. It was the same steel that had carried her great-grandmother across the border with nothing but hope and determination, the same steel that had kept her mother working 3 jobs to keep food on the table after her father left. "I understand," she said, meeting Stonefield's gaze directly. "But it was my father's life's work. I owe it to his memory to at least see what he spent all those years looking for." Webb and Stonefield exchanged a look that lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but seemed to contain an entire conversation. Then Stonefield was standing, straightening his tie with the kind of precision that suggested barely controlled irritation. "Of course, take all the time you need, Mrs. Vasquez, but don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't stay available indefinitely." After they left, the office felt larger somehow, as if their presence had been taking up more space than their physical bodies required. Maria sat in silence, staring at the business card Stonefield had left on the table. Heavy cardstock with raised lettering that probably cost more per card than she spent on lunch. "You don't have to decide anything today," Blackwell said gently. He was gathering the papers, organizing them into neat stacks that seemed to represent the tangled complexity of her father's life. "The claim is yours. You can sell it, hold on to it, or abandon it entirely. It's your choice." "What do you think I should do?" she asked. Blackwell paused, his hand still for the first time she'd entered the room. When he looked at her, she saw something she hadn't expected, something that looked almost like respect. "I think that your father wasn't the kind of man to give up on something unless he had a very good reason. And I think that men like Stonefield and Webb don't offer $50,000 for something they believe is worthless." The words settled over her like a blanket that was either comforting or suffocating. She wasn't sure which. Outside, the rain was still falling, each drop carrying with it the weight of decisions yet to be made and futures yet to be discovered. Maria thought about her daughter, probably sitting in after-school care right now, doing her homework on a plastic table, while other children got picked up by parents who didn't have to choose between paying for childcare and paying the electric bill. She thought about her father, alone in his trailer all these years, scratching at the earth with the desperation of a man who had gambled everything on a single, impossible dream. Had he died thinking he was a failure? Had he ever wondered what became of the daughter he'd left behind? "Can I see it?" she asked suddenly. "The mine." Blackwell nodded, unsurprised by the request. "I can arrange that. The road up is rough, especially this time of year, but it's accessible. Fair warning, though, there's not much to see, just an old mine shaft and some equipment your father left behind." Just an old mine shaft. The words should have been discouraging, but instead they filled Maria with something she hadn't felt in a long time: curiosity. For the first time since she'd received the phone call about her father's death, she found herself wondering not just what he had left behind, but why he had been so certain it was worth leaving everything else for. As she gathered her purse and prepared to leave, Maria caught her reflection in the rain-streaked window. She looked tired, worn down by years of struggle and disappointment, but there was something new in her eyes now. A spark that hadn't been there when she'd walked in. It was the same spark she'd seen in her father's eyes all those years ago, when he talked about emeralds and dreams and the fortune waiting in the darkness. Maybe her mother had been right about dignity being the one thing poverty couldn't steal. But maybe, just maybe, her father had been right about some things too. The rain continued to fall as she stepped out into the gray afternoon, each drop now sounding less like impatience and more like possibility. $50,000 waited in Stonefield's checkbook, a guarantee of stability and security that any rational person would accept without question. But Maria Elena Vasquez had learned long ago that sometimes the most rational choice wasn't the right choice. Sometimes the right choice was the one that scared you just enough to make your heart beat faster, the one that made you wonder what you might discover about yourself when you stopped playing it safe. Sometimes the right choice was the one that led you into the darkness, trusting that somewhere in that darkness you might find light. The gravel road wound through the Colorado mountains like a scar across the face of something ancient and unforgiving. Maria's 12-year-old Honda Civic groaned with each pothole, its worn suspension protesting every mile of the journey that had begun before dawn. She had left Isabella with her neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, promising to be back by evening, a promise that felt increasingly fragile as the road grew narrower and the civilization she knew fell further behind. The GPS on her phone had given up 20 minutes ago, reduced to a spinning wheel of confusion that mirrored her own state of mind. All she had now were the handwritten directions Attorney Blackwell had provided, his neat script describing landmarks that seemed to exist more in memory than in the physical world. Turn left at the lightning-struck pine. Follow the creek bed for 2 miles. Look for the rusted mailbox with no name. The morning sun painted the peaks in shades of gold and amber that would have taken her breath away under different circumstances. But beauty felt like a luxury she couldn't afford right now, not with the weight of yesterday's meeting pressing against her chest like a stone. $50,000. The number had followed her through a sleepless night, whispering promises and warnings in equal measure. She had called her sister Carmen at midnight, desperate for someone to tell her what to do. Carmen lived in Denver with her accountant husband and their 2 perfect children, in a house with a mortgage that would have terrified Maria, but somehow felt manageable to people who had never known the particular anxiety of choosing between groceries and gasoline. "Take the money, Elena," Carmen had said, using the childhood nickname that only family was allowed. $50,000? Are you insane? That's a year's salary for you, more than a year. But Carmen hadn't seen the look in Stonefield's eyes, hadn't felt the way he'd assessed her like she was livestock at auction. Carmen had never been married to a man who promised security and delivered abandonment, had never learned to recognize the difference between generosity and manipulation. The rusted mailbox appeared through the morning mist like something from a fever dream, tilted at an angle that suggested years of neglect and weather. No name, just as the directions had promised, though someone had scratched numbers into the metal that time had rendered illegible. Maria turned onto what could generously be called a driveway and immediately regretted every life choice that had led to this moment. The path, she couldn't dignify it with the word road, was little more than 2 tire tracks separated by a ridge of weeds and wildflowers. Her car bottomed out twice in the first 100 yards, scraping against rocks that seemed designed specifically to punish city vehicles. The engine temperature gauge crept steadily upward, and she found herself talking to the Honda like it was a nervous animal. "Come on, baby. We made it this far. Don't give up on me now." The trees pressed closer as she climbed, their branches creating a canopy that filtered the sunlight into dancing patterns across her windshield. This was wilderness in a way that city dwellers rarely encountered, the kind of untamed space that reminded humans they were guests here, not owners. Maria felt her pulse quicken, not entirely from fear, but from something deeper, a recognition that she was crossing into territory where different rules applied. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, the trees opened into a clearing that looked like the aftermath of industrial surgery. Her father's trailer sat at the far edge, a dented aluminum box that was once white, but now wore the patina of mountain weather like old scars. Solar panels covered the roof, their surfaces clouded with dust and time, and a generator squatted beside the trailer like a mechanical toad. But it was the mine entrance that stopped her breath entirely. Cut into the hillside like a wound that had never healed, it was larger than she had expected, framed with timber that looked sturdy despite its age. Mining equipment scattered around told the story of decades of work: wheelbarrows, cable coils, and pickaxes worn smooth by use. This wasn't the abandoned shaft she had imagined. This was the life's work of a man who never stopped believing. Maria sat in her car for several minutes, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the physical manifestation of her father's obsession. Somewhere in her purse, Stonefield's business card waited like a get-out-of-jail-free card. One phone call, and all of this would become someone else's problem. $50,000 would solve every immediate crisis in her life and create breathing room she hadn't had in years. But sitting here now, seeing the evidence of her father's unwavering dedication, that solution felt increasingly like betrayal. The trailer door was unlocked, secured only by a latch that had probably never seen a key. Inside, the space was surprisingly organized, every surface serving multiple purposes with the efficiency of someone accustomed to solitude. A fold-down table doubled as a desk, covered with notebooks and maps marked with notations in her father's careful handwriting. Photographs were thumbtacked to the walls, not of family, she noticed with a pang, but of rock formations and mineral samples that meant nothing to her untrained eye. The smell hit her like a physical force. Coffee that had been reheated too many times, metal shavings, and something else. Something that reminded her powerfully of her childhood, of Saturday mornings when her father would come home from construction jobs with dirt under his fingernails and stories about the world underground. On the tiny counter beside the camp stove, she found a letter addressed to her in her father's handwriting. The envelope was unsealed, as if he had written it but never decided whether to send it. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the pages and began to read. My dearest Maria Elena, if you are reading this, then I have finally run out of time, and you have inherited a burden I never meant to give you. I know I have no right to ask anything of you after the choices I made, after the way I chose this mountain over my family. Your mother was right to be angry. You were right to forget me. But I need you to know that everything I did, every day I spent in the darkness was for you and your mother and the future I dreamed of giving you. I know how that sounds, like the excuse of a selfish man trying to justify abandoning his responsibilities. Maybe that's all it is. Maybe I am the fool everyone said I was. But Maria, there is something here. I know it in my bones the way I knew you were going to be beautiful the first time I held you as a baby. The rock formations, the mineral traces, the way the water runs through certain veins, everything points to a deposit that could change everything. Not just for me, but for you, for Isabella, for generations of our family. I have spent 43 years learning this mountain's secrets. I have mapped every tunnel, tested every promising vein, followed every lead that dead-ended in disappointment. But in the past year, I have found signs that make my heart race like a young man's. There is an emerald here, Maria. Not just traces, but potentially one of the largest deposits ever discovered in North America. I know how this sounds. I know you have heard these promises before, but I am running out of time, and there are people who suspect what I have found. Men with money and lawyers and the kind of power that can take things from people like us. They have been watching me, making offers for land I know is worthless to disguise their interest in the land I know is priceless. If something happens to me before I can prove what I believe, promise me you won't sell to them. Not until you have seen for yourself what lies in the deepest tunnel, past the false walls I built to hide my work. Promise me you will give our family's dream one last chance. The flashlight is in the green toolbox. The rope is rated for 300 pounds. The entrance to the real mine is behind the loose boards marked with our family initials. Be careful, mija. Be braver than your old father ever was. I love you. I have always loved you. Everything I did wrong because I loved you too much to accept that you deserved less than everything. Papa.
She walked outside and looked around the clearing with new eyes, searching for signs of surveillance or recent visitors. The isolation that had felt peaceful moments before now felt exposed, vulnerable. If Stonefield was willing to track her movements, what else was he willing to do to get what he wanted? The mine entrance seemed to beckon from across the clearing, its darkness no longer empty but pregnant with possibility. Maria thought about her daughter, probably in math class right now, unaware that her mother was standing at the edge of either disaster or deliverance. She thought about her father, spending decades in solitude because he believed he could create a legacy worthy of his family's sacrifice. She thought about Stonefield's smile and her ex-husband's promises and every man who had ever looked at her like she was too naive to understand her own best interests. The green toolbox was exactly where her father had said it would be, tucked beneath the workbench in the trailer's tiny kitchen area. The flashlight was heavy in her hands, industrial grade with the weight of serious intent. Beside it lay a coil of climbing rope, a hard hat that looked like it had seen decades of use, and a handwritten map that showed the mine's layout in meticulous detail. Her father's voice seemed to whisper from the pages. The entrance to the real mine is behind the loose boards marked with our family initials. Maria stood at the threshold between two versions of her future. In one direction lay the safe choice, the rational choice, the choice that would pay her rent and quiet the voices in her head that said she was foolish to trust in dreams. In the other direction lay darkness and uncertainty, and the possibility that her father hadn't been wrong about everything. The afternoon sun was already beginning its descent toward the western peaks, and she knew that if she was going to explore the mine, she needed to start soon. Mountain darkness came quickly and without mercy, and she had promised Isabella she would be home by evening. But as she stood there, flashlight in hand, Maria realized that some promises were worth breaking for the chance to discover others that were worth keeping. Her father had spent 43 years in these tunnels, believing in something that everyone else dismissed as impossible. Maybe it was time to find out if impossible was just another word for unprecedented. This story gets even more incredible from here. If you're enjoying Maria's journey, smash that like button and share this with someone who loves amazing real-life adventures. Your support means everything.
The loose boards behind the mine entrance were marked with a faint V carved into the wood. V for Vasquez, for a family that had always fought for what they believed in, even when the odds were stacked against them. Maria pulled the boards aside, revealing a passage that disappeared into darkness like a throat waiting to swallow her whole. She clicked on the flashlight, and the beam cut through the blackness like hope made visible. Somewhere in that darkness lay either vindication or heartbreak, either her family's salvation or the final proof that dreams could destroy as easily as they could be redeemed. There was only one way to find out which. Maria Elena Vasquez, daughter of dreamers and inheritor of impossibilities, stepped into the mountain's mouth and let the darkness close behind her like the pages of a book whose ending had yet to be written. The passage behind the false wall was nothing like the main mine entrance. Where the outer shaft had been rough-hewn and industrial, this tunnel showed the careful attention of someone who understood that precision could mean the difference between discovery and disaster. The walls were shored up with timber that looked newer than the rest of the operation, and the floor had been cleared of debris with the thoroughness of a man who walked this path daily. Maria's flashlight beam danced ahead of her as she moved deeper into the mountain, each step taking her further from the world she knew and closer to something that felt increasingly like destiny. The air was cooler here, carrying the mineral scent of deep earth and something else. Something that made her pulse quicken with recognition she couldn't quite name. Her father's map proved accurate in every detail. 30 yards from the entrance, the tunnel branched exactly as his careful drawings had indicated. The left branch, marked with a red X on the map, was labeled False Trail, Dead End. The right branch bore a single word in her father's precise handwriting, Esperanza, Hope. She followed Esperanza deeper into the mountain's heart, her footsteps echoing in the confined space like a conversation with ghosts. The tunnel began to slope downward more steeply, and she could hear the distant sound of water. Not the trickle of seepage, but the steady flow of an underground stream. According to her father's notes, water was crucial to emerald formation, the liquid catalyst that transformed ordinary rock into something precious. 20 minutes into her underground journey, Maria's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The sound seemed obscenely loud in the tunnel's hushed atmosphere, and she fumbled to answer it before realizing she had no signal. The missed call notification showed Maria's school, her daughter's after-school program. Guilt twisted in her stomach like a living thing. She had promised to be reachable, had promised this would be a simple day trip to look at her inheritance.
But standing here in the darkness her father had navigated for decades, simple felt like a word that belonged to someone else's story. The tunnel opened into a cavern that took her breath away. Her flashlight beam, which had seemed powerful in the narrow passage, felt suddenly inadequate in the vast space. The walls disappeared into shadows that swallowed light like black water, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the echo of her own breathing return from surfaces she couldn't see. But it was the walls she could see that made her hands tremble as she held the flashlight. Even her untrained eye could recognize that the rock formations here were different from anything in the outer mine. The stone seemed to shimmer with an inner light, veined with what looked like green fire frozen in mineral form. This wasn't the rough granite and quartz she had expected. This was something that belonged in geology textbooks and museum displays. Her father's voice seemed to whisper from the walls themselves. "There is emerald here, Maria. Not just traces, but potentially one of the largest deposits ever discovered in North America." She had thought his letter was the desperate optimism of a man trying to justify a lifetime of wrong choices. But standing in this cathedral of stone and shadow, Maria began to understand that her father hadn't been chasing dreams. He had been following evidence. A sound from the tunnel behind her froze her blood. Footsteps. Careful, measured footsteps that belonged to someone trying to move quietly through the darkness. Maria clicked off her flashlight and pressed herself against the cavern wall, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain whoever was approaching would hear it. The footsteps paused at the entrance to the cavern, and then a voice called out, smooth, authoritative, and utterly unwelcome. "Mrs. Vasquez? I know you're in here. There's no need to hide." Richard Stonefield stepped into the cavern with the confidence of someone who owned every space he entered. His expensive suit looked absurdly out of place in the underground darkness, but he moved with the sure footing of someone who had been here before. The beam of his high-powered LED flashlight swept the cavern like a searchlight, finally settling on Maria's position with predatory accuracy. "How did you find me?" Maria's voice came out steadier than she felt, carrying the steel her grandmother had insisted ran in Vasquez's blood. Stonefield smiled, the expression visible even in the harsh LED glare. "GPS tracker on your car. Very simple technology these days. I apologize for the intrusion, but you weren't answering your phone, and we really do need to talk." "We?" Maria noticed the plural at the same moment she heard more footsteps in the tunnel behind Stonefield. Marcus Webb emerged from the passage, followed by two men she didn't recognize. Broad-shouldered, purposeful men whose presence suggested this conversation might not remain civilized. "Security," Stonefield explained casually, as if armed men in underground caverns were perfectly normal business practices. "Mining can be dangerous. We wouldn't want anyone to get hurt." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Maria felt the weight of her isolation pressing down on her like the mountain itself. No cell phone signal. No one knew exactly where she was. Miles from the nearest neighbor and surrounded by men who clearly had resources and connections she couldn't begin to match. "You've seen enough now to understand what your father found. This isn't some played-out claim. This is potentially one of the richest emerald deposits in North American geological history. Which is why our previous offer was perhaps insufficient. We're prepared to increase it to $200,000 cash today." $200,000. The number echoed in the cavern like a prayer and a curse combined. More money than Maria had ever imagined having, enough to transform every aspect of her life and Isabella's future. College tuition, a house with a mortgage she could actually afford, the kind of security she had dreamed of during 3 a.m. worry sessions over unpaid bills. But something in Stonefield's eyes reminded her of every predator she had ever encountered, every man who had looked at her desperation and seen opportunity. $200,000 was a fortune to her, but what was it to men who could afford GPS trackers and private security? What was it compared to the value of what surrounded them in this glittering cavern? How much is it really worth? Stonefield's smile flickered for just a moment. "Mrs. Vasquez, I think you're overcomplicating this. $200,000 is an extremely generous offer for an unproven claim." "Unproven?" Maria gestured to the walls around them, to the veins of green fire that seemed to pulse in the LED light. "Does this look unproven to you?" Webb shifted uncomfortably, and one of the security men checked his watch. Small tells that suggested this negotiation wasn't going according to their plan. Maria felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in years, the upper hand. "We've had preliminary geological surveys done," she lied smoothly, the falsehood coming easier than she had expected. "Several mining companies have expressed interest. I'm sure you understand that I need to explore all my options before making such an important decision." It was complete fabrication, but something in Stonefield's expression suggested her bluff had hit its mark. His smile became fixed, artificial, the expression of someone whose patience was wearing thin. "Mrs. Vasquez, I don't think you fully understand the complexities involved in mining operations of this scale. Environmental permits alone can take years to obtain. The initial investment required is astronomical. Without experienced partners, you could find yourself facing legal challenges that would make this entire discussion moot." The threat was no longer subtle. Maria felt the walls of the cavern closing in, not from geological pressure, but from human malice. These men had come prepared for negotiation,
But they had also come prepared for other possibilities. The security team's presence made it clear that they weren't accustomed to hearing the word no. "I need more time," she said, backing toward a section of the cavern wall that looked like it might offer another exit. "This is a major decision. I'm sure you can understand that." "Time," Stonefield repeated, as if the word tasted bitter. "Yes, time can be problematic. Your father spent decades here, and where did it get him? Died alone, broke, with nothing to show for his obsession but a trailer full of worthless rocks." The words hit Maria like physical blows, each one designed to wound and weaken. But instead of collapsing under the assault, she felt her spine straighten with the kind of anger that had carried her through her divorce, through single motherhood, through every challenge that had tried to break her. "My father spent decades here because he knew what you know now. He knew this mountain holds a fortune. He knew that men like you would try to take it from people like us. That's why he hid the real mine, why he built false walls and dead-end tunnels. He was protecting this from people who think money gives them the right to take whatever they want." Webb was looking increasingly uncomfortable, his nervous energy ramping up to the point where his hands were visibly shaking. "Richard, maybe we should—" "No," Stonefield cut him off sharply. "Mrs. Vasquez, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This isn't about taking anything from anyone. This is about recognizing reality. You're a single mother with a minimum wage job and an eviction notice in your purse. Even if this deposit is as rich as you think, do you have any idea what it would cost to extract it legally? The machinery alone would run into the millions. The environmental impact studies, the permits, the legal challenges from environmental groups, you're looking at a decade of litigation and expenses that would bankrupt most corporations." He took a step closer, and Maria could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the underground air. "We're offering you financial security right now, today, no strings attached. Walk away from this fantasy and give your daughter the stable life she deserves." The mention of Isabella felt like a violation, as if these men had researched not just her financial situation, but every vulnerable point in her life. The security team had spread out slightly, she noticed, positioning themselves to block potential exits. This was no longer a negotiation. This was containment. "What happens if I say no?" she asked. Stonefield's expression shifted, revealing something cold and calculating beneath the veneer of business professionalism. "I hope it doesn't come to that, Mrs. Vasquez, but mining claims can be contested, environmental concerns raised, safety violations reported. The legal system has many tools for resolving disputes, and not all of them favor the individual property owner." The threat was clear now. These men had resources, connections, legal weapons that could tie her up in court for years while they pursued other means of acquiring what they wanted. Maria thought of her meager savings, already strained by her father's funeral expenses. She thought of Isabella, counting on her mother to make smart decisions instead of romantic ones. But she also thought of her father's letter, of 43 years spent in solitude because he believed in something everyone else dismissed as impossible. She thought of her great-grandmother, crossing the border with nothing but determination and the belief that her descendants deserved better. She thought of all the women in her family who had faced impossible odds and chosen to fight anyway. "I need to see how deep this goes," she said, nodding toward what looked like another passage leading deeper into the cavern. "If you want to wait, you're welcome to, but I'm not making any decisions until I understand what my father left me." Before anyone could respond, she clicked on her flashlight and started toward the far passage. Behind her, she heard rapid conversation in voices too low to make out, but she didn't stop. If they were going to stop her, let them do it obviously. Let them reveal exactly what kind of men they really were. The passage led downward at a steep angle, requiring her to use her hands for balance in several places. The sound of water grew louder, and the air became noticeably more humid. According to her father's map, this section was labeled El Corazón, the heart. Whatever he had found down here had been important enough to hide behind multiple layers of deception. The passage opened into a chamber that defied every expectation she had formed about underground spaces. This wasn't the rough cave she had anticipated. This was a natural cathedral, with walls that soared upward into darkness and formations that looked like they had been carved by an artist with centuries to perfect each detail. But it was the pool of water in the chamber's center that stopped her completely. Fed by an underground spring, it was perhaps 20 feet across and so clear she could see every detail of the bottom. And the bottom? The bottom was carpeted with emeralds. Not the scattered traces or small deposits her father's letter had prepared her for, but a field of green fire that seemed to generate its own light. Stones the size of her fist lay among smaller gems like stars in a mineral constellation, all of them perfectly formed and breathtakingly beautiful. Maria sank to her knees beside the pool, her flashlight beam dancing across a fortune that made Stonefield's offers look like loose change. This wasn't just a mining claim. This was the kind of discovery that would be written about in geology textbooks, the kind of find that transformed understanding of what was possible. Her father hadn't been chasing dreams. He had been protecting a miracle. Footsteps behind her announced the arrival of the others, and she heard Webb's sharp intake of breath as his light joined hers in illuminating the chamber. "Mother of God," whispered Webb. Indeed, Stonefield's voice was controlled, but Maria could hear the excitement underneath. "Mrs. Vasquez, I think you're beginning to understand the scope of what we're discussing. This changes everything, of course. The logistics alone of extracting this safely will require resources that get out." Maria's voice cut through Stonefield's calculated speech like a blade. She stood slowly, turning to face the men who had followed her into her father's most sacred space. "I said, get out, all of you, now." Stonefield's expression hardened. "Mrs. Vasquez, I don't think you're thinking clearly. The shock of discovery can be overwhelming, but we need to discuss practical matters. This deposit cannot be extracted safely without proper equipment, proper expertise, which you're prepared to provide in exchange for what percentage? 90%? 95%? Enough to make sure I get a tiny fraction of what my father died protecting." The security team was looking to Stonefield for guidance, their hands resting near concealed weapons that weren't quite concealed enough. Maria realized she was probably in more danger than she had ever been in her life, surrounded by men who had too much to gain to let moral considerations slow them down. But she was also angrier than she had ever been. These men had tracked her, threatened her, invaded the sacred space her father had spent decades perfecting. They had looked at her desperation and seen opportunity, had calculated exactly how much pressure to apply to make her surrender her family's legacy. "You want to know what I think? I think you've known about this for months, maybe years. I think you've been watching my father, waiting for him to die so you could make your move on a grieving family. I think your $50,000 offer was insult added to theft, and your $200,000 is just a bigger insult." Webb was backing toward the passage entrance, his nervous energy reaching a breaking point. "Richard, we should go. This isn't how we planned." But Stonefield wasn't retreating. If anything, he seemed to be settling in for a longer confrontation. "Mrs. Vasquez, you're distraught, understandably so. But threats and accusations won't change the fundamental realities of your situation. You cannot develop this find alone. You lack the capital, the expertise, the political connections necessary to navigate the regulatory environment. Without partners like us, this discovery will remain exactly what it is now, a pretty sight in an inaccessible cave." One of the security men stepped forward slightly, and Maria caught the glint of metal under his jacket. The threat was becoming more explicit with each passing moment. What if I go public? What if I call the press, show them what's down here? How long do you think it would take for every mining company in North America to start making offers? Stonefield's smile was cold now, all pretense of friendliness abandoned. Mrs. Vasquez, I don't think you understand how easily mining claims can be disputed. Environmental concerns, safety violations, questions about the validity of the original survey. There are many ways that legal ownership can become complicated, expensive to defend, time-consuming to resolve. The threat was clear. They would bury her in legal challenges, drain her resources, make her life so difficult that selling to them would seem like salvation rather than surrender. But Maria had learned something about herself in the past hour, standing in her father's hidden sanctuary, surrounded by the proof of his lifelong faith. She had learned that some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds were overwhelming, especially then. "Then I guess we'll see how complicated you can make it," she said, her voice echoing off the chamber walls. "Because I'm not selling. Not to you. Not for any amount you're prepared to offer."
The silence that followed was loaded with potential violence. Maria could feel the security team's readiness, could sense Stonefield calculating costs and benefits with the cold precision of someone accustomed to removing obstacles to profit. But before anyone could act on the tension crackling through the chamber, new voices echoed from the passage above, authoritative voices that belonged to people accustomed to being obeyed. "Federal agents, everyone remain where you are." The beam of high-powered flashlights filled the chamber as uniformed agents descended into the space, weapons drawn and badges visible. Maria had never been so happy to see strangers in her life. Stonefield's face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession: surprise, anger, calculation, and finally resignation. Whatever resources he had, whatever connections he could call upon, they apparently didn't extend to controlling federal investigations. Mrs. Vasquez, the lead agent, was a woman in her 40s with graying hair and the kind of presence that suggested she had dealt with more dangerous situations than underground confrontations with corrupt businessmen. "Agent Sarah Chen, FBI. We've been investigating Mr. Stonefield's business practices for several months. Are you injured?" Maria shook her head, not trusting her voice to work properly. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was beginning to ebb, leaving her shaky and overwhelmed. "Mr. Stonefield and your associates need to come with us. We have some questions about your mining operations in Colorado, Nevada, and Montana." As the agents processed the scene and began leading the men toward the surface, Agent Chen approached Maria with the calm professionalism of someone accustomed to dealing with traumatized witnesses. "Mrs. Vasquez, we're going to need a full statement from you, but that can wait until tomorrow. Right now, I think you should get back to your daughter. She's been calling the sheriff's department, worried about you." Isabella. Maria's heart clenched with guilt and relief combined. Her daughter was safe, but she had been frightened and had probably spent hours wondering why her mother wasn't answering her phone. "How did you find me?" Maria asked as they began the trek back to the surface. "We've been monitoring Stonefield's communications for months," Chen explained. "When we realized he was making a move on this property, we put surveillance in place. Your father contacted our office 6 months ago with concerns about industrial espionage, but he died before we could complete the investigation." Her father had known. Even in his final months, he had been taking steps to protect what he had found, to ensure that people like Stonefield couldn't simply take it when he was gone. The journey back to daylight felt like emerging from a dream, or perhaps emerging into one. The late afternoon sun painted the mountains in shades of gold that seemed pale compared to the emerald fire she had witnessed in the depths. Her Honda sat exactly where she had left it, looking absurdly normal after everything that had transpired. Agent Chen handed Maria a business card and a phone number. "Mrs. Vasquez, what you've discovered down there is going to change your life in ways you can't imagine yet. There will be media attention, legal procedures, offers from legitimate mining companies. It's going to be overwhelming. But take your time, get good legal representation, and remember that you're in control now. Your father made sure of that." As the FBI vehicles disappeared down the mountain road, Maria sat in her car and called Isabella's school. Her daughter's voice, worried and relieved and slightly accusatory, was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. "Mom, where were you? I was scared something happened to you." "Something did happen, mija," Maria said, looking back toward the mine entrance where her father's greatest secret lay hidden in chambers of stone and water. "Something wonderful and terrifying and impossible. But I'm okay, and I'm coming home." As she started the engine and began the journey back to the world she knew, Maria Elena Vasquez realized that she was no longer the same woman who had driven up this mountain that morning. She was no longer someone things happened to, someone other people made decisions for. She was someone who owned a miracle, someone who had faced down predators and survived, someone whose daughter would grow up knowing that impossible was just another word for unprecedented. The emeralds would wait for her in their underwater garden, patient as the mountain itself. And when she was ready, when she had lawyers and experts and a plan worthy of her father's 43 years' sacrifice, she would return to claim not just her inheritance, but her family's place in a story that had only just begun. The first news van arrived at Maria's apartment complex at 6:30 in the morning, 3 days after the FBI raid on Stonefield Mining Consortium made headlines across Colorado. Maria watched from her kitchen window as the reporter adjusted her blazer and checked her appearance in the side mirror of the van, preparing to deliver what would undoubtedly be another breathless account of the emerald mine discovery that's rocking the mining world. Isabella padded into the kitchen in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes and looking older than her 10 years. The past 72 hours had aged them both in ways that couldn't be measured in simple time. "Are they here about the mine again, Mom?" Isabella asked, her voice carrying the weariness of a child who had been forced to mature too quickly. She had handled the initial media attention with remarkable grace, but Maria could see the stress in the tight lines around her daughter's eyes, in the way she had started checking the locks on their apartment door multiple times each night. "Probably, mija," Maria said, pulling Isabella close and inhaling the familiar scent of her daughter's shampoo, something normal and precious in a world that had become surreal overnight. "But we don't have to talk to them. We don't have to do anything we don't want to do." It was a promise that felt increasingly hollow with each passing hour. The story had exploded across social media within hours of the FBI's press conference, transforming overnight from a local news item into an international sensation. "Single mother inherits $75 million emerald mine" had become the kind of headline that made people click, share, and speculate endlessly about her life, her choices, and her future. The phone rang for the 15th time since dawn, and Maria glanced at the caller ID before letting it go to voicemail. Another mining company, another legal firm, another person who wanted to help her manage her newfound wealth in exchange for a percentage that would make them rich and her comfortable. She had stopped answering calls from numbers she didn't recognize, but the voicemails kept piling up like digital snow. Attorney Jonathan Blackwell had been fielding most of the serious inquiries, and his calm professionalism had become Maria's anchor in the chaos. He had recommended several mining consultants and geological survey companies, all of whom agreed that her father's discovery was unprecedented in both scope and quality. Conservative estimates put the value of the emerald deposit at $75 million. Optimistic projections suggested it could be worth 3 times that amount. Numbers that large had lost meaning for Maria. They existed in a realm of possibilities so far removed from her lived experience that they might as well have been measurements of astronomical distances. What did it mean to own something worth more than most people would earn in a dozen lifetimes? How was she supposed to process the transformation from worrying about grocery money to being cornered by some of the largest mining corporations in North America? The doorbell rang, and Maria tensed before recognizing the pattern. 2 short rings, a pause, then 1 long ring. Their agreed-upon signal with Miss Rodriguez, who had been running interference with reporters and curiosity seekers since the story broke. "Mija," Mrs. Rodriguez said as Maria opened the door.
There's a woman here who says she's from the Smithsonian Institution. She doesn't look like a reporter." Behind Mrs. Rodriguez stood a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun, and clothes that suggested comfort mattered more than fashion. She carried herself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room without needing to prove it. "Mrs. Vasquez, I'm Dr. Catherine Morrison from the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History," she said, extending a hand with calluses that spoke of fieldwork rather than academic theory. "I've been studying emerald formations for 37 years, Mrs. Vasquez. I've examined specimens from Colombia, Zambia, Brazil, Afghanistan, every major emerald deposit on Earth. What your father discovered, Mrs. Vasquez, isn't just valuable, it's scientifically unprecedented." Isabella curled up next to Maria on the couch, listening with the intense focus she usually reserved for her favorite television shows. The past few days had forced her to grow up quickly, but she was still young enough to find wonder in the extraordinary circumstances that had transformed their lives. "Your father's notes, which the FBI shared with our research team, suggest he understood the geological significance of what he found," Dr. Morrison continued. "The formation process that created this deposit required a unique combination of factors that shouldn't exist anywhere in North America. The water chemistry, the mineral composition, the tectonic conditions, everything had to align perfectly over millions of years." She pulled out a tablet and showed them photographs that took Maria's breath away. Professional lighting and high-resolution cameras had captured the emerald chamber in all its otherworldly beauty, transforming her underground discovery into something that belonged in a museum or cathedral. "These formations could revolutionize our understanding of emerald geology," Dr. Morrison said, her voice carrying the excitement of a scientist confronting the impossible. "Your father documented evidence of ongoing formation, emeralds that are still growing, still developing. We've never seen anything like it." "What does that mean for us?" Maria asked, though part of her already suspected the answer would complicate her life in new and unexpected ways. "It means this discovery has value that goes beyond monetary considerations," Dr. Morrison said gently. "This is a natural wonder, Mrs. Vasquez, something that belongs not just to you, but to human understanding of how our planet works. The scientific community will want to study it, protect it, ensure that future generations can benefit from what your father preserved." Isabella looked up at her mother with eyes that held too much understanding for someone her age. "Does that mean we can't sell it, Mom?" The question hung in the air like incense, heavy with implications that went beyond simple financial considerations. Maria thought about her father's letter, his conviction that he was protecting something precious for future generations. Had he understood that his discovery would create responsibilities as well as opportunities? Dr. Morrison set down her coffee cup with the careful precision of someone choosing her words thoughtfully. "Mrs. Vasquez, ownership of natural wonders often comes with moral obligations that the law doesn't necessarily address. The giant sequoias in California are privately owned, but their owners understand they're stewards of something irreplaceable. The same principle applies here." Before Maria could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Attorney Blackwell. "Emergency meeting needed. New developments. Can you come in this morning?" The sense of foreboding that had been building in Maria's chest since dawn crystallized into certainty that her brief period of processing the discovery in relative peace was about to end. "Dr. Morrison, I appreciate you coming here, and I understand what you're saying about stewardship," Maria said, standing with the decisiveness that had carried her through single motherhood and financial crisis. "But right now, I need to focus on understanding my legal position before I can make any decisions about moral obligations." Dr. Morrison nodded with the understanding of someone who had dealt with complex ownership issues before. "Of course, but Mrs. Vasquez, please remember that some opportunities only come once in human history.
Your father spent 43 years protecting something extraordinary. Don't let others pressure you into decisions that diminish what he accomplished. After Dr. Morrison left, Maria and Isabella prepared for another day of navigating their transformed reality. The simple act of getting dressed had become complicated by the knowledge that photographers with telephoto lenses might be waiting outside, ready to document every aspect of their lives for public consumption. The law office felt like a sanctuary compared to the chaos of the outside world. Attorney Blackwell had arranged for them to use a side entrance to avoid the reporters who had taken up permanent residence in the building's lobby, and his staff had been screening calls and visitors with military efficiency. "We have 3 major developments," Blackwell said without preamble as soon as Maria and Isabella were seated. His usual calm demeanor showed cracks of stress that suggested the past few days had been challenging for him as well. "First, the geological survey is complete, and the official valuation puts the emerald deposit at between $75 and $200 million, depending on extraction methods and market conditions." $200 million. The number bounced around Maria's consciousness like a pinball, ricocheting off every assumption she had ever made about what was possible in her life. "Second, we've received formal offers from 11 different mining companies, ranging from outright purchase to various partnership arrangements. The highest offer is from Meridian Mining Corporation, $40 million cash plus a 20% royalty on all extracted emeralds." Isabella's gasp was audible. Even at 10 years old, she understood that $40 million represented a kind of wealth that existed primarily in movies and fairy tales. "Third," he said, "and this is the complication, the federal government has initiated proceedings to have the site designated as a national natural landmark. If that designation goes through, it would severely restrict any mining activities." The room fell silent except for the tick of Blackwell's antique clock, each second marking time in a pause that felt pregnant with consequence. "What does that mean?" Maria asked. Though part of her already suspected, she already knew.
"It means the scientific community is mobilized," Blackwell explained. "Dr. Morrison's visit this morning was just the beginning. The Smithsonian, the National Science Foundation, the U.S. Geological Survey, they're all arguing that this discovery is too scientifically significant to be commercially exploited." Maria felt anger rising in her chest like floodwater. "So after my father spent his entire life protecting this discovery, after he died alone and broke, believing in something everyone said was worthless, the government wants to take it away from his family because it turned out to be too valuable?" "Not take it away," Blackwell clarified carefully. "You would still own the land and retain certain rights, but commercial mining would be restricted or potentially prohibited entirely. There might be compensation available through federal programs, but nothing approaching the commercial value of unrestricted extraction rights." Isabella looked between her mother and the attorney with the grave expression of a child trying to understand adult complexities that would shape her future. "Mom, what does this mean for us?" Before Maria could answer, Blackwell's assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Blackwell, there's a representative from Meridian Mining here. He says it's urgent and relates to the federal designation proceedings." The man who entered was everything Maria had come to expect from mining company executives. Expensive suit, confident bearing, hands that had never been calloused by manual labor. But unlike Stonefield, he carried himself with the professionalism of someone who didn't need to rely on intimidation to get what he wanted. "Mrs. Vasquez, I'm James Patterson from Meridian Mining," he said, extending a hand with the firm grip of someone accustomed to closing deals. "I apologize for the intrusion, but time has become a critical factor in this situation." "How so?" Blackwell asked with the wariness of an attorney who had learned to distrust urgency in business negotiations. "The federal designation process typically takes months, but political pressure from the scientific community is accelerating the timeline. If Mrs. Vasquez is going to exercise her commercial extraction rights, she needs to act quickly, potentially within the next few weeks." Maria felt the walls closing in again, felt the familiar sensation of being pressured to make decisions that would benefit others more than herself. "And I suppose Meridian Mining is prepared to help me act quickly?" Patterson smiled with the practiced charm of someone who made his living convincing people to trust him with their most valuable assets. We're prepared to purchase the mining rights for $60 million with a commitment to begin extraction within 30 days. Cash sale, no royalties, no ongoing obligations. You walk away wealthy, and we handle all the complications with federal regulators. $60 million. The number was so large it had lost connection to any reality Maria could comprehend. Enough money to secure Isabella's future through multiple generations. Enough to transform not just their lives, but the lives of everyone they cared about. But something in Patterson's urgency reminded her of Stonefield's desperation, of the way predators moved when they sensed their window of opportunity closing. "What happens to the site after extraction?" she asked. His expression flickered almost imperceptibly. "Standard reclamation procedures, of course. The site would be restored to environmental compliance standards." "Which means?" "The emerald formations would be removed, the underground chambers would be backfilled for safety, and the surface would be restored to approximate its original condition. The Emerald Cathedral would be destroyed. The underwater garden, where millions of years of geological patience had created something unprecedented, would be reduced to extracted wealth and filled holes. Her father's 43 years of protection would end in industrial obliteration." "I need time to think," Maria said, standing with the authority she had learned in her father's hidden sanctuary. Patterson's professional mask slipped slightly. "Mrs. Vasquez, I don't think you understand the time pressures involved. The federal designation process could render your commercial rights worthless. This offer won't remain available indefinitely." "Then I guess we'll see what happens when it expires," Maria said, meeting his gaze with the steel her grandmother had always insisted ran in Vasquez's blood. After Patterson left, Maria sat in Blackwell's office feeling the weight of decisions that would echo through generations. Isabella had moved to the window and was watching the reporters in the street below with the fascination of someone observing an alien species. "Mom, are we going to be rich?" Isabella asked without turning from the window. The question was simple, but the answer was anything but. Rich in money? Potentially. Rich in the knowledge that they'd preserve something irreplaceable? Possibly. Rich in the satisfaction of honoring their father's sacrifice? Certainly. "I don't know, mija," Maria said honestly. "But I know that we're going to make the right choice, even if it's not the easy one."
Blackwell leaned back in his chair, with the expression of someone who had watched many clients navigate life-changing decisions. "Mrs. Vasquez, may I offer some perspective from 30 years of practice?" Maria nodded, grateful for any wisdom that might help her see clearly through the confusion of competing interests and impossible numbers. "In my experience, the decisions people regret most are the ones they made under pressure, without taking time to understand their full range of options," Blackwell said. "You have something unprecedented here, not just the emerald deposit, but the power to determine its fate. Don't let anyone rush you into a choice you'll spend the rest of your life questioning." That evening, Maria and Isabella sat in their small living room, eating takeout Chinese food and watching news coverage of their story on 3 different channels. The disconnect between their quiet domestic reality and the breathless media speculation about their future felt increasingly surreal. "Mrs. Vasquez has not responded to requests for comment," one reporter noted, standing outside their apartment complex with the kind of dramatic lighting that made everything seem more urgent than it actually was. Sources close to the situation suggest she's weighing offers from multiple mining companies, while environmental groups urge her to preserve the site for scientific study. Isabel used her chopsticks to capture a piece of broccoli with the concentration of someone performing surgery. "Mom, do you think Papa knew this would happen?" Maria thought about her father's letter, his conviction that there were people who would try to take what he had found, his careful preparations to protect his discovery until it could be safely transferred to his family. "I think he knew it would be complicated. I think he hoped we'd be smart enough and strong enough to handle whatever came next." "Are we?" asked Isabella, with the direct honesty that made her mother's heart ache with love and pride. "We're going to find out," Maria said, pulling her daughter close and feeling the weight of legacy and possibility settle around them like a blanket that was both comfort and responsibility. Outside, the news vans maintained their vigil, ready to document whatever decision would emerge from their small apartment and echo through the geological and financial worlds. But inside, a mother and daughter ate Chinese takeout and planned for a future that would be determined not by pressure or profit, but by the values that had carried their family through generations of impossible choices. The Emeralds waited in their underwater cathedral, patient as the mountain itself, while the world above debated their fate. But Maria Elena Vasquez was beginning to understand that some decisions couldn't be rushed, no matter how much money or pressure was applied. Her father had waited 43 years to be proven right. She could wait a little longer to be certain she was making the choice he would have been proud of. The mountain looked different in the pre-dawn darkness. Maria had driven the familiar road countless times over the past 2 weeks, but this morning felt weighted with finality, as if the landscape itself understood that today would mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of something unprecedented. Isabella slept in the passenger seat, wrapped in her favorite blanket and clutching the small emerald sample that Dr. Morrison had given her. A perfectly formed crystal, no larger than a marble, but containing within its green depths the same geological miracle that had transformed their lives. They had left Denver at 4 in the morning to avoid the media circus that had become their constant shadow, and the peaceful silence of the mountain highways felt like a gift after weeks of relentless attention. Today was the day Maria would announce her decision to the world. The past 14 days had been a master class in the complexity of unprecedented choices. Mining companies had increased their offers to astronomical levels. Meridian's final bid had reached $85 million, with guarantees of extraction beginning within weeks. Environmental groups had organized letter-writing campaigns and online petitions, turning Maria into an unwitting symbol of the tension between conservation and commerce. Federal bureaucrats had expedited the National Natural Landmark designation process with efficiency that suggested powerful forces were working behind the scenes. But it was the quiet conversations that had ultimately shaped her decision. Late-night phone calls with her sister Carmen, who had driven up from Denver to help navigate the chaos and stayed to provide the kind of family support that couldn't be purchased at any price. Long walks with Isabella, who had asked questions that cut through the complexity with the clarity that only children possessed. Evening discussions with Attorney Blackwell, who had moved beyond legal advice to something approaching friendship, helping her understand that some decisions transcend monetary calculation. And conversations with her father that happened only in the silence of her own mind, imagining what Eduardo Vasquez would say about the choice his daughter faced. Would he understand if she sold the discovery that had consumed his life? Would he approve if she chose preservation over the financial security he had dreamed of providing for his family?
The trailer looked smaller in the gray light of dawn, dwarfed by the media infrastructure that had grown around it like a technological forest. Satellite trucks lined the rough road, their dishes pointed skyward like flowers seeking sun. Generators hummed constantly, powering the lights and cameras that would broadcast her announcement to news outlets around the world. Dr. Morrison waited near the mine entrance with a small team of colleagues, their equipment cases and scientific instruments a stark contrast to the commercial mining gear that other crews had brought. The Smithsonian team had spent the past week documenting the emerald chambers with a thoroughness that bordered on reverence, treating each formation like a sacred text written in stone and time. James Patterson from Meridian Mining stood with his own contingent, their presence a reminder that $85 million remained on the table, waiting for a signature that would transform the underground cathedral into an industrial operation. His expression carried the confident patience of someone who believed that rational people always chose financial security over abstract principles. The federal representatives maintained their own careful distance, led by Agent Chen and a bureaucrat from the Department of the Interior who had flown in specifically for this announcement. Their jurisdiction was clear, but their power was limited. They could designate the site as a national natural landmark, but they couldn't force Maria to accept compensation that fell far short of commercial value. Maria had invited one additional group that surprised everyone present: representatives from the Northern Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes, whose ancestors had considered these mountains sacred long before mining companies or federal agencies had claimed authority over them. Elder Joseph Standing Bear had driven down from the reservation not to influence her decision, but to witness whatever choice she made and offer the perspective of people who understood that some responsibilities transcended individual ownership. Isabella awoke as Maria parked the Honda between two news vans, stretching and looking around with the resigned acceptance of someone who had grown accustomed to extraordinary circumstances becoming routine. "Is today the day, Mom?" she asked, her voice still thick with sleep, but her eyes already alert with the intelligence that had helped her navigate the complexities of their transformed life. "Today's the day, Mija," Maria confirmed, checking her appearance in the rearview mirror. She had chosen to wear her navy blue dress again, the same one she had worn to that first meeting with Attorney Blackwell, mended tear and all. If she was going to make a decision that would echo through generations, she wanted to do it as herself, not as some media-friendly version designed to play well on television. The crowd that had gathered was larger than she had expected, despite the early hour and remote location. Reporters, camera crews, mining company representatives, environmental activists, federal officials, and curious members of the public had created a small city in the mountain clearing that had been her father's solitary domain for 40 years. Dr. Morrison approached as Maria and Isabella made their way toward the makeshift podium that had been erected near the mine entrance. "Mrs. Vasquez, thank you for including our team in whatever you've decided. Regardless of your choice, I want you to know that your father's discovery has already contributed to our understanding of emerald formation in ways that will benefit scientific research for decades to come." Patterson intercepted them halfway to the podium, his professional smile carrying an edge of desperation that suggested his confidence was less complete than his demeanor implied. "Mrs. Vasquez, I hope you've had time to fully consider the implications of the various options. Meridian remains committed to our offer, but I should mention that market conditions in the gemstone industry can be volatile." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Delay too long, and even their generous offer might evaporate like morning mist. Maria nodded politely but didn't respond, saving her words for the announcement that would settle all speculation and set the course for everything that followed. Attorney Blackwell had prepared remarks for her, carefully crafted language that would convey her decision while protecting her from legal challenges or misinterpretation. But standing here in the shadow of the mountain that had defined her father's life, Maria realized that carefully crafted language belonged to a world of calculated choices and managed risks. This moment called for something more honest. She approached the microphone with Isabella beside her, the two of them representing 3 generations of Vasquez dreams and determination. The crowd fell silent with the anticipation of people witnessing history in the making. "My name is Maria Elena Vasquez," she began, her voice carrying clearly in the mountain air. "2 weeks ago, I inherited this mining claim from my father, Eduardo Vasquez, who spent 43 years of his life believing there was something precious hidden in this mountain. He was right, but not in the way any of us expected." She paused, looking out over the faces of people whose lives would be affected by whatever she said next. Mining company executives who had flown in from around the world, scientists who saw in her father's discovery a window into geological processes that had been hidden for millions of years, environmental activists who viewed the emerald chambers as a natural wonder that belonged to all humanity,
federal officials who represented the complex machinery of government attempting to balance competing interests. My father didn't just discover emeralds. He discovered something that challenges our understanding of how our planet works. Dr. Morrison and her team have confirmed that this site represents a unique geological phenomenon, emeralds that are still growing, still forming, in conditions that shouldn't exist anywhere in North America.
Through the window, Maria could see the carefully designed walkways that allowed controlled access to the emerald chambers while protecting the delicate formations from damage. The engineering had been complex and expensive, but the foundation's revenue had proven more than adequate to fund both preservation and accessibility. Educational groups toured the chambers daily during the warmer months, their sense of wonder carefully documented by researchers studying the psychological impact of encountering natural beauty in its most pristine form. The financial projections that had once seemed like fantasy had become sustainable reality. The foundation generated approximately $2 million annually through various revenue streams, enough to fund ongoing research, maintain the facilities, provide scholarships for promising geology students, and ensure that Maria and Isabella lived comfortably without ever losing sight of their responsibilities as stewards. Maria's phone buzzed with a text from Attorney Blackwell, now the foundation's board chairman. Meridian Mining declared bankruptcy yesterday. Patterson called to congratulate you on your prescient business decision. Thought you'd enjoy the irony. She did enjoy it, but not in the way Blackwell probably expected. The collapse of Meridian Mining served as a reminder that the quick extraction of finite resources often led to quick exhaustion of both the resources and the companies that depended on them. The foundation's model of sustainable stewardship was proving more durable than aggressive capitalism. Isabella appeared in the doorway, having finished her morning tour group. At 15, she had inherited her mother's determination and her grandfather's passion for the mountain's secrets, but she had also developed her own vision for how the foundation could serve the future. "Mom, I've been thinking about the proposal for the high school internship program," Isabella said, settling into the chair beside Dr. Morrison with the easy confidence of someone who had grown up in academic environments. "What if we partnered with schools on the reservation? Elder Standing Bear mentioned that several tribal colleges have geology programs that could benefit from hands-on research experience." The suggestion was typical of Isabella's approach to problem-solving, inclusive, forward-thinking, and rooted in understanding that the Foundation's mission extended beyond pure science to encompass social responsibility. In 5 years, she had evolved from a frightened 10-year-old worried about eviction notices to a young woman who thought naturally in terms of generational impact and community benefit. "That's an excellent idea," Dr. Morrison said. "Indigenous perspectives on geological stewardship could contribute valuable insights to our research methodology." Maria felt a familiar surge of pride in her daughter's wisdom, but also a recognition that Isabella was already beginning to envision her own relationship with the Foundation's mission. In a few years, she would leave for college. She was already being recruited by geology programs at universities that had partnered with the Foundation. But she would return with knowledge and perspectives that would carry the work forward in directions Maria couldn't yet imagine. The intercom on Maria's desk crackled with the voice of the Foundation's receptionist. "Dr. Vasquez, there's a reporter from National Geographic here for your interview about the anniversary article." 5 years. Had it really been that long since she had stood in Attorney Blackwell's office, desperate and overwhelmed, learning that her father had left her a burden she didn't understand? The woman who had inherited a worthless mining claim felt like a different person entirely from the geologist and foundation director who now managed a research operation that attracted scientists from around the world. The National Geographic photographer had set up his equipment in the main chamber, using specialized lighting that revealed the emerald formation's intricate beauty without damaging the delicate mineral structures. Maria and Isabella posed beside the underground pool where the largest emeralds continued their patient growth. Mother and daughter reflected in water so clear it seemed like liquid crystal. "Mrs. Vasquez?" "Dr. Vasquez," he corrected himself. 5 years ago, you chose preservation over immediate wealth. Do you ever regret that decision?" Maria considered the question while listening to the sound of water flowing through chambers that had been forming for millions of years.
Regret was the wrong word for what she felt when she thought about the path not taken. Curiosity, perhaps. Wonder about what her life might have looked like if she had chosen Meridian's $85 million over the Foundation's mission. But regret? No. I think my father spent 43 years protecting something he knew was precious but couldn't fully understand. The choice I made 5 years ago wasn't between money and principle. It was between extracting wealth once and creating value indefinitely. The reporter scribbled notes while the photographer captured images that would accompany a story reaching millions of readers worldwide. The Foundation's model had inspired similar projects in other locations, private conservation efforts that balanced preservation with sustainable economic benefit. Maria received calls monthly from landowners who had discovered natural wonders and wanted advice on how to protect them while sharing their value with the world. After the interview, Maria and Isabella walked through the research center's library, past shelves lined with scientific journals, graduate theses, and children's books about geology that the Foundation had helped publish. The space buzzed with quiet activity as researchers from 3 continents worked on projects that ranged from mineral formation analysis to environmental chemistry studies.
"Mom, do you think Papa knew it would become like this?" Isabella asked as they paused beside a display case containing some of the most perfect emerald specimens ever discovered, their green fire captured behind protective glass that allowed observation while preventing damage. "I think he knew it was bigger than what one person could understand or protect alone," Maria replied. "I think he hoped that someday it would serve purposes he couldn't even imagine." They walked outside into the late afternoon light, where groups of visitors were concluding their tours with the kind of awed silence that suggested they had encountered something that would change their understanding of what was possible in the natural world. Children pressed their faces against the protective barriers that allowed them to peer into the emerald chambers, their expressions carrying the wonder that Maria hoped would inspire some of them to pursue careers in science and conservation. The day's final tour group was emerging from the underground chambers, led by Dr. Morrison and accompanied by a delegation of geology professors from universities in Colombia, Brazil, and Zambia, countries that had previously been considered the world's primary sources of high-quality emeralds. The Eduardo Vázquez Memorial Research Center had become a pilgrimage site for emerald researchers worldwide, a place where theoretical knowledge met living geological processes. The formation rate we're documenting here suggests that under optimal conditions, emerald crystal growth occurs approximately 3 times faster than previously believed, Dr. Morrison was explaining to her international colleagues. "This discovery is revolutionizing our understanding of beryl crystallization in metamorphic environments." The technical language might have intimidated Maria 5 years ago, but she now understood it as easily as her native Spanish. Her accelerated geology degree had been demanding, but studying the science behind her inheritance had felt less like academic requirement and more like learning to speak the language her father had been trying to teach her all along. As the visitors departed and the research center settled into evening quiet, Maria found herself drawn back to the memorial garden that had been established near the original mine entrance. Eduardo Vázquez's headstone was simple granite, engraved with his name, dates, and a single line that captured the essence of his life's work. He believed in what others could not see. Isabella joined her mother beside the memorial, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the research center's kitchen, a ritual they had developed over the past 5 years, ending each day with quiet reflection on the responsibilities they had inherited and the legacy they were building. "The high school guidance counselor called today," Isabella said, settling onto the bench that faced the mountain peaks. "MIT wants to interview me for their early admission program." MIT! Maria felt a complex mix of pride and anticipation. Isabella's academic record was exceptional,
her research experience unprecedented for someone her age, and her passion for geology genuine and deep. But MIT would take her far from Colorado, far from the foundation, far from the work that had defined their lives for the past 5 years. "What do you think about that?" Maria asked carefully. "I think I want to learn everything I can so I can come back and make this even better," Isabella replied with the matter-of-fact confidence that had become her signature trait. "The foundation needs someone who understands both the science and the business side, someone who can take it into the next phase." The next phase. Maria realized that she had been so focused on establishing and sustaining the foundation that she hadn't given much thought to what would come after the initial success. But Isabella was already thinking generationally, already envisioning how the work could evolve and expand. "There are geological formations in other parts of the world that could benefit from the same kind of stewardship model," Isabella continued. "Imagine a network of privately conserved research sites, all working together to advance scientific understanding while protecting natural wonders. Papa's discovery could become the prototype for a whole new approach to conservation." A network of research sites. The idea was ambitious and inspiring and slightly overwhelming in its scope. But sitting here in the shadow of the mountain that had transformed their lives, listening to her daughter envision possibilities that extended far beyond their individual circumstances, Maria realized that audacious dreams were the Vasquez family legacy. The stars were becoming visible above the mountain peaks, their light filtered through air so clear that the Milky Way stood out like a river of diamonds against the velvet sky. 5 years ago, Maria had driven up this same mountain road in desperation, carrying nothing but her father's letter and a daughter's trust. Tonight, she sat beside that same daughter, now a young woman with her own vision for the future, and felt the weight of stewardship balanced by the lightness of purpose fulfilled. Her phone buzzed with a text from Carmen. "Saw the National Geographic photographer's preview shots online. Papa would be so proud. We all are." Papa would be proud. The words carried more weight than any financial valuation, more satisfaction than any commercial success. Eduardo Vasquez had spent 40 years alone in these mountains, believing in something precious that he could protect but not fully understand. His daughter had spent 5 years learning to share that precious thing with the world while keeping its essence intact. The emeralds continued growing in their underwater cathedral, patient as the mountain itself, adding microscopic layers of green fire to formations that would outlive human civilization. But above them, the work of stewardship continued in human time. Daily tours that inspired wonder, research projects that advanced knowledge, educational programs that prepared future generations to inherit both the natural world and the responsibility to protect it.
"Ready to head home?" Maria asked as the mountain air grew crisp with the evening chill. "Ready," Isabella replied. But neither of them moved immediately. Some moments deserved to be extended. Some peace was worth savoring. When they finally walked back to the Honda, now 5 years older but still reliable, still Maria's preferred transportation despite the foundation's success, they carried with them the satisfaction of another day spent honoring a legacy while building something new.
The journey to her father's remote mountain claim revealed the first hints that Eduardo Vasquez hadn't been the foolish dreamer everyone had believed him to be. The gravel road wound through Colorado wilderness like a scar across something ancient and unforgiving, each mile taking Maria further from the world she knew and closer to something that felt increasingly like destiny. Her 12-year-old Honda Civic protested every pothole and incline, its worn suspension groaning with the weight of a journey that had become as much emotional as physical. The mining operation was far more sophisticated than a desperate man's last gamble. The equipment scattered around the entrance told the story of decades of methodical work. Professional-grade tools worn smooth by countless hours of use. tunnels expertly reinforced with timber that looked newer than the surrounding structures, and documentation that revealed the meticulous attention of someone who understood that precision could mean the difference between discovery and disaster. Most importantly, Maria discovered her father's letter, a heartbreaking explanation that recontextualized 27 years of assumed abandonment. Eduardo's words, written in the careful script she remembered from childhood birthday cards, revealed a man tormented by impossible choices. "I need you to know that everything I did, every day I spent in the darkness, was for you and your mother and the future I dreamed of giving you." The letter explained that he hadn't left because he loved his dreams more than his family. He had left because he believed his dreams could save his family. The distinction was crucial and heartbreaking, revealing a man who had sacrificed his relationships in pursuit of a legacy that could transform his family's circumstances forever. His letter contained detailed instructions for finding the real mine, hidden behind false walls and dead-end tunnels designed to protect his discovery from the very people who were now pressuring his daughter to sell. Eduardo had spent 4 decades learning the mountain's secrets, mapping every tunnel, testing every promising vein, following every lead that dead-ended in disappointment. But in his final year, he had found signs that made his heart race like a young man's R8. Evidence of emerald deposits that could potentially represent one of the largest finds in North American history.
The immediate aftermath of the discovery created a media circus that transformed Maria's quiet life into international headlines overnight. Single mother inherits $75 million emerald mine became the kind of story that captured global attention, bringing opportunities and pressures in equal measure that no amount of preparation could have anticipated. News vans lined the street outside her apartment complex, reporters called at all hours, and her daughter Isabella found herself thrust into a spotlight that was both thrilling and terrifying for a 10-year-old trying to understand how her life had suddenly become international news. Mining companies from around the world increased their offers to astronomical levels as geological surveys confirmed the deposit's unprecedented value. Meridian Corporation's final bid reached $85 million, with guarantees of immediate extraction and promises of environmental remediation that meant little given the irreversible nature of large-scale mining operations. Conservative estimates put the emerald deposit's value at $75 million, while optimistic projections suggested it could be worth 3 times that amount, numbers so large they lost connection to any reality Maria could comprehend. Simultaneously, the scientific community mobilized to protect what Dr. Catherine Morrison from the Smithsonian called a natural wonder that belongs to human understanding of our planet. The emerald formations weren't just valuable commercially, they represented active geological processes that could revolutionize understanding of how such deposits formed. Environmental groups organized campaigns, federal agencies expedited landmark designation processes, and researchers worldwide recognized the site's unprecedented scientific significance. Dr. Morrison's visit to Maria's apartment brought the weight of scientific authority to bear on a decision that had seemed purely financial. The Smithsonian's research revealed that Eduardo's discovery challenged fundamental assumptions about emerald geology. The formation process that created this deposit required a unique combination of factors that shouldn't exist anywhere in North America: specific water chemistry, mineral composition, and tectonic conditions that had to align perfectly over millions of years. More remarkably, the formations showed evidence of ongoing development, emeralds that were still growing and developing in real time. Such active formation had never been documented before, making the site invaluable for understanding how Earth creates its most precious minerals. This created an impossible choice between immediate wealth and long-term preservation, between personal security and scientific responsibility, between extracting value once and creating it indefinitely. The pressure was enormous from all sides: mining companies offering generational wealth, environmental groups demanding total preservation, federal agencies seeking control through landmark designation, and her own daughter's future hanging in the balance. The federal government's move to designate the site as a national natural landmark would provide protection, but severely restrict commercial activities, potentially leaving Maria with ownership of something she couldn't develop economically. The weight of the decision was compounded by Maria's awareness that she was making choices not just for herself and Isabella, but for future generations who would inherit whatever she decided. Her father had spent 43 years protecting something he believed was precious. Did she have the right to undo that protection for immediate financial benefit? But she also had responsibilities to her daughter, obligations to provide security and opportunity that $85 million could guarantee in ways that uncertain preservation efforts couldn't. Isabella's perspective, shaped by 10 years of financial struggle, but also by natural wisdom that sometimes surprised her mother, became crucial to Maria's decision-making process. "Mom, are we going to be rich?" her daughter had asked, but the question carried complexities that went beyond simple wealth. What did it mean to be rich? Was it the security that money could provide, or was it the knowledge that you had protected something irreplaceable? Isabella's ability to grasp these nuances despite her young age reminded Maria that some decisions required thinking beyond immediate circumstances to consider what kind of example she wanted to set for her daughter. The late-night conversations with her sister Carmen, who represented the voice of practical consideration, created additional pressure to choose immediate security. Carmen's comfortable middle-class life in Denver, with its predictable mortgage payments and retirement planning, seemed to argue for accepting Meridian's offer and joining the ranks of people who didn't have to choose between groceries and gasoline. But Carmen hadn't seen the Emerald Cathedral, hadn't felt the weight of stewardship that came with understanding what Eduardo had protected. Attorney Blackwell's counsel proved invaluable during this period of impossible decision-making. His 30 years of legal experience had taught him that the choices people regretted most were those made under pressure, without taking time to understand their full range of options. His advice to resist urgency and explore alternatives created space for Maria to consider possibilities that weren't being offered by either the mining companies or the federal agencies. His suggestion that she had something unprecedented extended beyond the geological discovery to encompass her power to determine the site's fate. Maria's decision to establish the Eduardo Vasquez Memorial Foundation for Geological Research and Education surprised everyone because it wasn't one of the anticipated options. Instead of selling or surrendering control, she chose to become a steward, creating an innovative model that balanced private ownership with public benefit. The foundation would generate sustainable revenue through controlled educational tourism, scientific partnerships, and limited research extraction while permanently protecting the emerald formations from commercial destruction. This choice required rejecting both the immediate wealth of commercial extraction and the limited compensation of federal preservation in favor of something unprecedented.
The decision demanded courage that went beyond simple risk-taking. It meant rejecting immediate security for long-term responsibility, choosing to learn geology well enough to manage a complex scientific operation, and trusting that stewardship could be more valuable than ownership. It meant believing that her father's 43 years' sacrifice deserved something greater than conversion into extractable wealth, that some discoveries were too important to be owned by single entities or exploited for short-term gain. The foundation model required extensive legal structure and scientific partnership to ensure both sustainability and credibility. Working with research institutions, Maria developed protocols that would allow ongoing study of the emerald formations while protecting their integrity. Educational tourism would provide public access to the discovery while generating revenue sufficient to fund continued research and site maintenance. Limited extraction of emerald samples for scientific study would serve museums and universities worldwide, while avoiding the wholesale destruction that commercial mining would require. The choice also required Maria to transform herself from someone who received decisions to someone who made them, from someone struggling with immediate necessities to someone managing resources that could impact scientific understanding for generations. The accelerated geology degree she pursued represented more than academic achievement. It was evidence of her commitment to understanding what she was protecting, to becoming worthy of the stewardship she had accepted.
The 5-year epilogue revealed the extraordinary success of this unprecedented approach, validating Maria's choice in ways that pure profit calculations never could have predicted. Dr. Maria Vasquez, having completed her geology degree with the dedication of someone driven by purpose rather than mere ambition, now manages a world-renowned research center that generates $2 million annually while advancing scientific understanding of emerald formation. The Eduardo Vasquez Memorial Research Center has become a model for private conservation, inspiring similar projects globally and proving that preservation can be economically sustainable when approached with creativity and long-term vision. The foundation's success extends far beyond financial metrics to encompass achievements that money couldn't purchase. Research conducted at the site has revolutionized understanding of mineral formation, with scientific papers cited in geology textbooks worldwide and discoveries that have influenced mining practices across multiple continents. Graduate students from dozens of universities have completed thesis projects based on data collected from the ongoing formations, creating a new generation of geologists whose understanding of mineral processes was shaped by Eduardo's discovery. The site has become a pilgrimage destination for geologists and a teaching laboratory where theoretical knowledge meets living geological processes. The careful balance between access and protection has allowed thousands of students and researchers to experience the Emerald Cathedral while ensuring that the formations remain intact for future study. The educational programs developed by the Foundation have inspired countless young people to pursue careers in geology and environmental science, multiplying the discovery's impact far beyond its immediate scientific value. Isabella's evolution from a frightened 10-year-old to a confident 15-year-old preparing for MIT represents another dimension of the story's success that transcends simple financial measurement. She has grown up understanding that miracles require both protection and sharing, that some responsibilities transcend individual benefit, and that the most valuable inheritance isn't what you receive, but what you choose to protect for those who come after. Her vision for expanding the Foundation model internationally suggests that the next generation will carry these principles even further, creating networks of protected research sites that could transform how humanity approaches conservation. The contrast with Stonefield Mining's bankruptcy 5 years later validates Maria's choice in ways that illuminate the fundamental differences between extraction and stewardship. Companies focused on rapid extraction of finite resources often face rapid exhaustion of both resources and sustainability, their business models dependent on finding new deposits to exploit rather than maximizing value from existing discoveries. The Foundation's model of patient stewardship has proven more durable than aggressive capitalism, more valuable than immediate gratification, and more sustainable than approaches that prioritize short-term profits over long-term value creation. Dr. Morrison's continued involvement with the Foundation has produced scientific discoveries that exceeded even her initial optimistic projections. The thermal imaging of deep chambers revealed additional formations that show signs of active emerald development, suggesting that Eduardo's discovery was even larger and more complex than originally understood. The ongoing research has identified conditions that could potentially be replicated in other geological environments, opening possibilities for enhancing emerald formation in locations worldwide. The story's deeper themes resonate beyond the specifics of emerald mining or geological discovery to address fundamental questions about the relationship between wealth and value, the difference between ownership and stewardship, and the responsibility that comes with inheriting something precious. It explores how desperation can make people vulnerable to exploitation, how perceived generosity often masks self-interest, and how the pressure to make quick decisions frequently serves those applying the pressure rather than those facing the choice.
The narrative demonstrates that some gifts become precious only when they're shared, that stewardship can generate more lasting value than ownership, and that legacy is measured in generations rather than fiscal quarters. Maria's transformation from desperate single mother to confident steward represents more than personal success. It demonstrates that ordinary people can rise to extraordinary circumstances when they understand the difference between taking and receiving, between ownership and responsibility, between wealth that can be extracted once and value that can be created forever. Eduardo Lasquez spent 43 years alone in the mountains, protecting something precious for a future he wouldn't live to see. His sacrifice seemed like abandonment until it was revealed as the ultimate act of faith in his family's ability to handle responsibility greater than immediate need. His daughter learned to share that gift with the world while keeping its essence intact, creating something that served multiple constituencies without compromising core values. Her granddaughter now envisions expanding this model globally, understanding that some principles are worth spreading precisely because they challenge conventional approaches to resource management.
The emeralds continue growing in their underwater sanctuary, patient as geological time itself, adding microscopic layers of green fire to formations that will outlive human civilization. Above them, the work of human stewardship ensures that wonder and wisdom will be preserved together, that scientific knowledge will advance understanding of how our planet works, and that future generations will inherit both natural treasures and the wisdom to protect them. The Foundation has created a template for how private conservation can serve public good, how scientific research can generate sustainable revenue, and how individual choices can impact understanding that benefits all humanity. The complete story delivers emotional depth, scientific wonder, and timeless themes about the true meaning of wealth, the importance of long-term thinking, and the power of choosing legacy over immediate gratification. It demonstrates that the greatest inheritances aren't material possessions, but the wisdom to recognize responsibility, the courage to accept stewardship, and the understanding that some treasures become precious only when they're given away. Maria's choice to reject $85 million in favor of sustainable stewardship ultimately proved that the most valuable inheritance isn't money, but the knowledge that some gifts can only be truly owned by sharing them with the world.